Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Get Out of Rap. Today, I'm joined by Tim Pickard, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Sabio. Tim, thanks very much for joining today.
It's a pleasure, Martin. Great to be here.
We were just talking about dogs and our lockdown dogs beforehand. We've both got dogs somewhere in the vicinity of our recording, so we could expect a bark or two.
Yeah, watch out. If the postman turns up, it's going to be noisy.
Yeah, Hugo suddenly started barking at the doorbell at 8 months. I don't know what that's about.
No, but ours did, and we encouraged him not. We reacted very minimally to the doorbell, but it didn't make any difference. He figured out that was something that he should bark at. So yeah.
So I'm really intrigued by. I've been teased a little bit about your career, and it's more than what you can kind of see on LinkedIn. But Chief Marketing Officer at Sabio now, huge responsibility. But what has been your sort of journey to date to get to this point now?
Well, it's been long. I mean, I've been around a while, so I'm no spring chicken. I was referred to by a journalist a little while ago as a veteran, and that was at the point I thought I've been around too long. So
well, I don't know. Vets football. I quite like being called a veteran. It means people might even underestimate you a little bit.
Well, yes, that's a fair point. Well, look, I think it divides into two fairly big buckets. My early career was working for US corporations and really learning the trade. So I worked for some fairly large US tech companies and as a marketing director, head of marketing for Europe, and that was about 15 years, I suppose, on with 2 or 3 different companies, latterly with RSA Security. And that was it was a great experience. Taught me an enormous amount about how to run a global team. I ran everything outside of North America eventually for RSA, and it was just a great experience and a great learning experience. And I think that investment in people and their growth, I was benefited from that, and it was for me it was kind of the right path. I learned my trade, if you like, over that 15 years. And then I left RSA and joined Mimecast, which many people will know is a very successful organization. And when it was 35 people. I mean,
really?
It was tiny. And we built the marketing infrastructure there. We input a lot of the technology that they still use, and a lot of the messaging. We used to agonize about, me and the CEO and the kind of the co-founders. We would agonize around the messaging, and built that essentially as a platform for them to go forward. So the second part of my career, I guess, is high growth companies. So Mimecast, then I went to New Voice Media, which was about 35 people at that point as well. And we took that from a very small organization in Basingstoke to a global.
Amazing Stoke.
Amazing Stoke. That's right.
I used to live there.
Look, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Basingstoke,
no.
but as the hub of the technology world, that doesn't really fit into that category. But
no.
But actually, we built this business into a global business, North America, Asia Pacific, right across Europe. And after I was there for 7 years, it was sold to Vonage, who were a NASDAQ listed telecoms company in the US. And ultimately, they've been acquired by Ericsson now. So it was interesting because this was 2011, and I remember having conversations with very senior analysts in very well-known tech analyst firms about cloud contact center, and they were saying, can't see it. can't see it. Cloud was clearly taking hold, but they were saying, well, this is telecoms. This is not something where you can get a response in 3 or 4 seconds. This is immediate. Any latency will be picked up. You can't do it. And then 4 or 5 years later, of course, they had the brilliant idea that cloud contact center was going to be a thing, and it became a reality. But it was a bit of a leap of faith back in the early days. And the other thing that we did was to tie the business very closely to Salesforce and Service Cloud, and become the primary offering, contact center offering for Service Cloud, which turned out to be a smart thing to do. And then subsequent to that, then Sabio, which is obviously where I am now.
Yes, representing.
Get the brand out there, which has changed just enormously in even in the 2.5 years that I've been with the business. We've acquired 13 companies over time, and we've recognized that the market is changing, and those acquisitions plus our own organic growth and investments have put us in a position to be able to support the marketplace as it changes. And I'm sure that is a topic that we will come on and talk more about.
Well, what a storied career. Were you always drawn to marketing prior when you first started, or?
No, I actually started in sales, and I was in sales for probably 4 or 5 years, I suppose. Rose to the heady heights of sales manager in the city, and I used to complain a lot about marketing. And that we were getting no support. So my MD said, right, okay, smarty pants, you're so clever. Why don't you have a go? And I thought, well,
this will be easy.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't want to be kind of in one function all of my career. So I thought, oh well, I will take that challenge and expand out my experience. And so I did that, and I thought, well, actually I should probably get some educational experience and background here as well. So I did an exec MBA, so it's like a 2-year fixed term part-time MBA at Cranfield, and I did that as well, which was probably one of the smartest things I did.
Really? You'd recommend it?
Oh yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, it was fantastic. And the people, and this is, gosh, it was 25 years ago or something now. But the content, the pace, the way that they're structured, you can't do all the work. It's too much. So you have to rely on other people. You have to build teams, which is kind of part of the whole process, I think, at Cranfield, and learn to have this kind of network that supports you through all of the different elements of an MBA, because it's there's finance and there's marketing and there's strategy and there's lots of different elements to it. And what you find is you get people who are exceptional in certain areas. Certainly the finance piece was not my area of expertise, and you rely on your team member that has that skill. So it's a really interesting process, although I still do wake up sometimes having nightmares about my dissertation and having not completed it. So.
Isn't that strange? One of the only sort of recurring bad dreams I have is that someone comes and tells me that I didn't actually get my degree, and it's weird, isn't it?
It's weird. It's one of those things.
There's another one actually where I wake up in the morning of my final exam and I'm a badger, so it's a bit Kafka-esque. So but we won't go there for that. I was intrigued by something you said about your time at Mimecast, where you and the CEO and I think you mentioned one of the agonized. You said agonized over messaging. Can you just talk to that?
Yes, it's really interesting. As part of growth companies, the two things that they obsess about from marketing. One is brand and messaging, and the other one is demand creation. Those are the two big buckets that growth companies just obsess about. And the thing about brand and messaging is that you're never really done with it. You can have a version of it that you're happy with for a period of time, but then things change. The product and the proposition changes, or the customer requirements change. Something changes, and it's tempting to keep kind of tinkering and changing that message, but that's a very dangerous thing to do, because the market absorbs the message at a much slower rate than you can change it, right? So and so you kind of have to tolerate, I guess, for a period of time, what you think is something that's maybe slightly jarring with reality. And we used to literally, myself and the founders at Mimecast, we would almost daily, we would have discussions bordering on arguments around how we would move this forward. And I think that friction, that obsession is something that drives owner managers and CEOs very hard. It drives them very hard around that, just to make sure that the message to the marketplace is as clear as it can possibly be, and represents the business as accurately as it possibly can. And I think it's a marketer's challenge to be able to deliver that in an appropriate way, but also to manage the timing of it as well, because of that absorption issue. If you keep changing it, nobody really understands what you do.
You are. Yeah,
exactly. So you have to manage that over a period of time. And you can see, you look at all of the big brands in the tech space, their message has changed over time, because their business and their proposition and their customers' needs have changed over time. So it has to, but you've got to manage it at a pace that the market can absorb it.
And you talked about, you mentioned at the end, kind of towards the end of your career summary, around cloud and tech and coming into contact centers, and that kind of evolution of contact centers and the attention of technology. How have you what's your observations about that? Because you've been sort of front and center throughout that.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed very dramatically over time, but actually, if you had your crystal ball and you looked at the kind of the transition curve and where we are on that, I still think we're somewhere near the beginning.
Really?
Yeah, because I see this as there's a perfect storm, right, emerging within this space. So customers are changing, customer requirements are changing, customer sentiment is definitely changing, and that's somewhat, I mean, it's speeded up by COVID, but it would have happened anyway, but probably over a longer period of time. And that is, we are much more used to and willing to use digital technologies as a route to dealing with organizations and getting service. We are much more time constrained than we used to be. Obviously, there's a generational element around. Younger generations are now coming through, and they're not used to hanging on the phone for 20 minutes for a 60-second conversation. That doesn't work. So that's changing. And people just want answers. They have busy lives and they want answers. And I'll come on to a fantastic example of where this sort of has all come together. So customer requirements have definitely changed. That's one element of the perfect storm. businesses have had to respond to that. So as a business, I recognize I can't meet my customer face to face as much anymore. It just doesn't happen. And actually, I was listening to the radio this morning, and there's an article from the Retail Consortium around this kind of state of retail at the moment, and they had the CEO of Currys on, and his view was 50%, more than 50% of their sales are now done online, and that's not going to change. It's not, that's been driven by COVID because we couldn't go in store, but we're not going back. So they recognize that when they want to meet their customers, they're going to have to do it in store, or they're going to have to do it in customer service. And that is a fantastic realization that customer service has now become a critical touch point, or one of the only touch points, if you want to have that relationship and build that relationship with your customer. So it's not just about can I resolve the issue that they're calling me about. This is my opportunity to get more information, offer more services, build that relationship. So it's really much more than just a resolution issue now. And businesses have recognized that. The other thing that's becoming increasingly clear for businesses is that there's a strong link between good customer service and profitability. And there's the Watermark study that is quite well known, which looks at S&P 500 companies, and over time, those that invest in customer service are it's about 20% more profitable over time. But the Institute of Customer Service, I was reading a report from them, they also see strong links between customer service, improved customer service and profitability and they specifically look at retail and banking. But I think there's a general understanding that there is this link between customer service and profitability now. The other thing from the Institute of Customer Service was that 34% of customers are willing to pay more for better customer service.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to see that the customer service is a really critical element around the service that the businesses provide. The third part of the perfect storm is that technology is going to support all of these things. And I'm fascinated. I'm a market watcher, and I'm fascinated at what I've seen in terms of the dynamics of the marketplace. So you've got traditional vendors in the market, and then you've got these new vendors. So organizations like Twilio, like Google, like Amazon, Salesforce. I mean, people think, they don't necessarily immediately think of Salesforce in the contact center, but of course they've been there for a while with Service Cloud. They've just launched the workforce engagement management product. They have a tie-up with Amazon Connect, and they've just led the investment in Genesis of a £500 million raise that Genesis did. So the lead investor was Salesforce Ventures and Zoom. So there's a lot of new entrants into the marketplace, a lot of money being invested in this marketplace. Zoom wanted to buy Five9 for nearly $15 billion. The shareholders of Five9 rejected the offer. Wasn't enough. So what did Zoom do? They went out and they launched their own product.
Yeah. So
you can see the dynamics of this space. There's a lot of very kind of mega brands who are not interested in a few million, tens of millions of dollars in revenues. They're interested in hundreds of millions and billions, because that's what's going to move the needle in those businesses of that scale. So this is a space that is getting an enormous amount of interest from new entrants into the marketplace, from new investment into the marketplace. And the reason is because of what I described earlier. There's a change happening here. Customer requirements are changing. Businesses are having to respond to that. And that really puts Sabio in this great, strong position, because a lot of complexity, a lot of new businesses in the space, a lot of new offerings, and it's our job to make sense of all that and to be able to provide and pull that into a set of solutions that our customers can then make use of. And I said I know I'm rambling on a bit, but I said I'd give you
I love this. Is great.
I said I'd give you an example of where this all comes together. So and this can be found on our website. So HomeServe is a customer of ours, and we worked with them to build a conversational AI booking system for engineers, essentially. So they wanted to build, this technology that would allow them to manage 50% of their calls and their call time to book an engineer. Because what we said earlier on, why hold for 15 minutes to have a 60-second conversation? It just doesn't make sense. So what this technology allows them to do is to use speech to be able to understand the intent, why am I calling, and then to be able to deliver that service without talking to a human. They wanted to do 50%. They achieved 70% of their calls, sub 60-second time in order to make that transaction, improve customer satisfaction along the way, and this is just an enormously successful way to manage those relatively low level but important conversations. And actually they over time they've got so granular with the intent. So why am I calling? They had skills-based routing. They had 5 teams that would route these calls through. Now they have 120 intents.
Wow.
So it's the level of granularity is significantly greater than they could possibly do in that other world. So that's a really interesting use of technology, and kind of, I guess, understanding the direction of travel that we're going in. The question then is, well, if I'm managing 50 to 70% of my calls in that conversational AI route, what happens to those advisors? And the answer to that question is that their role is changing, and the advisor's role will change over time because of the use of technology. But I think that is a positive change, because I think that what we talked about earlier on was that this is the point at which brands can have that live interaction with their customers. So when you get more complex, sensitive, difficult, entrenched, conversations or problems that can't be managed in the automated way, those then need to have greater support, and those will take longer. They're going to require more empathy with the customer, understanding the challenges maybe that they've got, or the complexity of those challenges, and being able to kind of live the brand for the customer and provide that extra level of service,
and have that kind of emotional exchange as well, around kind of, let me help, I hear you, let me help.
Well, exactly, and that's actually pretty tough, so there may be fewer of those, but they're a lot harder to manage, not just so kind of technically harder, but also probably emotionally harder as well. So I think that is a change that's going to happen there, and of course the technology that we use to support AI is the same technology that we will use to support advisors. So I'm an advisor, I'm trying to give advice. The AI tool will offer me 2 or 3 different options about, well, this is what you might want to think about. So I'm getting some support from the technology as well. So yeah, I think that those three areas: customer expectations, customer demands changing, businesses understanding that and wanting to meet their customers and have that exchange, and then the technology that and the investment that's going in to support that creates this environment that is just going to accelerate the changes that we're going to see over time.
And you said something there around that I just thought when you were explaining it, you summarized it really well, was it's kind of a dizzying, that perfect storm. If you're in there, in any element, whether customer, provider, it is a bit dizzying, the amount of choice, the challenges, but also the opportunities. And you said something around how you guys at Sabio are perfectly positioned to try and make sense of all that and package it up into something that helps your customers. But how do you maintain that kind of view in the middle and keeping a sense of how best to respond?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I think there's two main routes that we have established. One is we actually have quite a big development team in-house now. So part of that, and part of what we do, and part of the service that we provide is that we build our own products. In fact, we just launched a product at our event a few weeks ago, which you were at. So we launched Console, which is a product that in the AI space that really
brings it all together.
It brings the front end together in terms of the interface with the technology at the back end, which is the AI piece, which is providing some of that interpretation of speech to text, but then also the intent management as well. So we provide that glue, I suppose, that allows that front end and back end to be connected together. So we provide expertise, but we also provide technologies that help to do that. So our development team are very active around looking for where are those difficult areas that need to be connected together, because no one of those businesses that we talked about earlier on, regardless of their size, and they are huge organizations, but regardless of that, they can't do it all. They cannot do all of the different pieces that we now see need to be aligned in order to deliver this type of service. So that's where we come in. We can put these solutions together, but we can also look at where are the difficult parts that we can support with our own products to be able to do that. So product development is one area that we do that, and the other area really is the way that we align all of the information from all of the customers that we work with. So you imagine that across some of the world's largest brands in retail and manufacturing and banking and insurance and travel, etc., our customers are diverse, but also generally they're the kind of the larger organizations. So we have a lot of information that we can manage internally around the challenges that our clients face with their customers, and how they're managing those over time and how we can support that. So those are the two key areas. I think it's about experience and managing the experience that we have, but also understanding where the gaps are so that we can use our development resources to plug those. And also, and thirdly, we're quite an acquisitive company. We've acquired, well, in the time that I've been with the business, so just over 2 years, we've acquired 7 companies and integrated those into the group. The most recent being Make Positive, which is a Salesforce implementation partner. And that has been just, I think, a really important part of that mix, because understanding the customer, understanding that customer data and being able to use customer data in a way that supports customer service. And clearly Salesforce's intent is fairly major in this space as well. That's been a really important part of our acquisition strategy as well.
I think as well as acquisitive, you would say you and Sabio are both inquisitive in terms of searching out new opportunities and searching out how best to apply the technology. Because as you said, something you said earlier really kind of resonated around recognize the CEO of Currys recognizing that their online sales are there to stay, that that's not going anywhere, and therefore that presents an opportunity for contact centers to be the direct interaction with customers, to be the ones that either positively or negatively affect the brand, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that was a very interesting interview this morning, actually, and very timely. It really kind of resonated with what we're seeing. The in-store traffic that retailers experience, I mean, it has gone down. No, there's no question about that. But the store has a purpose. It's not going away. This is Curry's, kind of interpretation of the problem. And the store's purpose is really about advice. It's about going in, looking at the choice that you potentially have, getting advice, managing problems or issues that might turn up. But it's really that expertise that you're getting in that store environment that allows you to make those informed choices about the purchases that you make. So their view was the store isn't going to go away. It's going to play an important part in the retail experience, but the transition of where I spend my money is probably not going to change either, and that a lot of that has moved into the online world and probably isn't going to change back again.
Oh, and you mentioned there with the home serve piece something that I'm really interested in. I know our listeners are as well, and that is around conversational AI. Now, I think sometimes I verge from techie to Luddite. Could you just explain how it's best applied? What's the best applications of conversational AI?
Gosh, now that is a question. Well,
because that home serve example was perfect. Just it's lots and lots of transactions where I'm assuming over time they have been able to go up to 120 intentions.
Yeah,
they didn't start like that though, I guess.
No, that's right. AI is a very, for me, it's a very interesting topic, and I would say I probably err on the Elon Musk side of caution, because he's quite cautious when it comes to AI, and he's been criticized by the Mark Zuckerbergs and others of this world who think AI is the answer to everything. I'm relatively cautious about it as well. I don't necessarily think that Skynet is just around the corner, but
I don't know. I'm always wary of lightning.
Yeah, well, I think as a race, we have to be cautious here, because I was listening to the Reith lectures at Christmas time, which was all around. There are, I think, 3 or 4, but they're on AI from a specialist. I forget his name, but fascinating. I mean, if you have a spare hour, listen to those brief lectures, and it's fascinating what's going on, and the broader terms of AI. But as it specifically relates to to customers. Actually, it's quite interesting. Some of these things are so natural now, the voices, and that it's very clear from call recordings that customers do not realize that they are talking to a computer. It's that divide is kind of gone now. You know, it doesn't really exist anymore, and that's kind of an interesting social aspect to how AI fits into our lives. But I think that home serve thing is a great example of very, very well-intentioned, good quality, implementation of AI as a technology that provides a great level of service very fast, and the outcome is very positive. So that to me is kind of is today's implementation, if you like, of AI technology. There are other really good examples of where AI has been implemented extremely well. So, you know, things like, and I've seen examples in the Nordics where the bot will change languages. You know, it's just because it has that power in the back end of, you know, different language skills, you know, the ability to be able to interpret. It's just you know, really clever use of technology that allows you to move from one topic or language into another one pretty seamlessly. So, you know, I think that's very clever in the way that it's been implemented. So really, in terms of conversational AI, there's the kind of the interpretation of the speech to text part. So and of course this is important because our interfaces with computers in the past have been, you know, it's been this, or it's been a keyboard, you know, but now we can interface with computers using our voice. Now computers don't speak, obviously. They understand binary, so you've got to go speech, text, and that it gets translated into ones and zeros for the computer to be able to understand it. And so that has got enormously better in terms of that ability for machines to be able to interpret speech into text. And then the AI part of that is around being able to manage that those intents. What is it that I'm actually calling about? What is it that I'm concerned with, or what is my problem? What's the challenge that I have? And being able to understand that. And of course, we talked about home serve example, the ability of computers to be able to you know, manage enormous amounts of data and enormous amounts of information that's what they're good at. Yeah. That's what they're good at. And so so AI is a very logical application really for computers, and we're not constrained by Moore's law with AI. So because the addition of AI processing in the cloud is way ahead of Moore's law. So the constraints of kind of compute power have gone away largely, and now we're in a world that's not bounded by that. It's bounded by our imagination and what we can think of and do. You know, and that's almost limitless, really.
And it's exciting, isn't it? And is that why you said earlier, when it comes to where we are, you think we're very much at the beginning? So with that in mind, what do you think even just the next 5 years looks like for the contact center industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's you know, there are probably some key elements around that that I think are going to determine where we get to. So AI is clearly one of those. It's just, it's a given that that's going to be something that's going to change fairly rapidly over the next 3 to 5 years. And we will all, well, I mean, we've all seen it already, but it's, it's going to accelerate. So the thing about technology, it tends to speed up, not slow down. So I think AI is going to be very important. Digital, the move to digital, which we talked about. Now, the importance of that is that the more that we digitize our interactions, the more that those can be accessed and stored in this kind of, pool of data, and then analyzed. So the importance of data and analytics is going to be huge over the next 5-year period of time as well. And again, I think we're relatively in our infancy around that, because the transition to digital, it's still happening. So access to that data and the collection of that data is going to be very important, and that's going to be a key shift. Cloud, I mean, we're moving in that direction, so that's going to enable a lot of this as well. And we talked about the growth of AI and the compute power of AI, is accelerating, and that's obviously part of that cloud infrastructure. So that's an important part of it. I think CRM and the integration of CRM as part of this is also key, because that's the kind of the client interface and what gives us the information to be able to support on an individual basis our customers. And then really it's about pulling all that together through analytics. So those are the key constituents that are going to move us in the direction of travel that we want to get into. And I think that where can we get to in 5 years? Well, I think that conversational AI will be commonplace. Now you come across it, but it's going to be pretty commonplace. I think things like tools like Alexa and Google's Home, all of those types of devices, things that you can interface with, are going to be more common, but they're going to be more connected at the back end as well. So I'll be able to have that conversation with HomeServe through Alexa, and I'll just go, or my outside tap's frozen. Can you sort out an engineer? And it's done.
Yeah.
So it's all of this. I think a lot of that is probably going to become more connected, which means that the channels that we regard as channels, I've got to pick up my phone or go to an app in order to do something, they go away. They become part of just a normal life. So the thought of my son sitting on a phone call for 20 minutes on hold, it's like, it's not gonna happen. And if you roll the clock forward 5 to 7 years, and and another generation of people coming through, and technology that's moved forward, it's going to all change again. So that's the exciting thing about this, about technology and about being in a technology space, is that it changes all the time, and it's really that I don't know, that it's about being in an industry that really is so dynamic and changes so fast that it's just exciting. It's just an exciting
great.
thing.
I thought the Disrupt event was brilliant, and I loved how you had the option you could go into after the keynotes, you could go into technology and people, but even in the technology space, the interaction with people and the focus on well-being and things that matter to us all, regardless of where we sit in the contact center world, I thought was really refreshing. And I just wondered how much of that is a key part of your messaging for Sabio?
It is a very important part of our message, because this is an industry that's about people, really. It's about those interactions between people and individuals. And I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we need to take care of our people, and to give them good, positive working environments that they can enjoy and thrive in, wherever that is. So technology allows us to do that in office space or on the couch. It's really anywhere now, and that's a great thing. But it brings its own challenges, and when we talk to customers, their challenges are really a lot around people, around attraction, retention, being able to provide that good positive environment for their staff, particularly as we talked about, as the role of advisors is changing. And it takes a long time to train someone to really understand your business, to really understand the complexities of how some of the more difficult challenges can get resolved. And that's it has this knock-on effect on the brand. When I talk to you, when I talk to somebody who I'm trying to get some help from, or I'm trying to sort out a problem with, as far as I'm concerned, I'm talking to the brand.
Yeah.
And that, we talked about the measurability around customer experience to profitability. Well, this is really the part of the space that we're talking about now, which is about the brand experience that you're getting, and that has to be repeatable and genuine. It's got to be otherwise people don't believe it. Doesn't come across as real. So all of that has to be provided by people.
Yeah.
So it has been tough the last couple of years. It's been very tough on everybody, and I think there is a much greater awareness of well-being, of how to support people in your organization, give them the proper training, give them the proper tools, provide a good working environment for them, remunerate them properly, reward them properly, all of those things, because actually the job that they're doing is representing your brand, and you want them to do that consistently and well. So yes, I think it's a lot about people. And as a business, we're also, we're very concerned about equality in the workplace. We're trying very hard around that. We're making improvements around things like gender pay gaps, those types of things. This is a real focus for us as a business, but also for our customers, and we want to try and support that as well. So yeah, and I think you're right. I think there was a lot of focus around people, but the thing that I loved was that the engagement from the audience around that, and the feedback that we had was just phenomenal. So I've run a lot of events over the years, and you get a sense of when you've hit the topic just right. And I think it was pretty much, without wishing to blow my own trumpet of Sabio marketing team too much, I think that it was pretty much, the sentiment was well,
it was just a great atmosphere, a great event. When you come away from something, and I was on the train home just thinking all of the different things you want to try, you've taken on board and want to try in your own centre. That's the sign of a good event, where you're just buzzing,
Yeah.
with ideas and thoughts, and
Yeah.
it was just great. So yeah, you've set the bar pretty high.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Tim, it's been really insightful. I've loved chatting to you. Alfie was much better behaved than Hugo as well in this.
Well, he was banished early on. Yeah, no, it's been great. Thanks, Martin. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I've learned a lot. So Tim Pickard, CMO at Sabio, thank you very much.